Hello, welcome back to our live coverage of the United Nations Climate Talks here in Cancun, Mexico. Apologies if you've been waiting for us for the last hour. We've gone on live an hour later today, but it has given us time to get some great interviews for you. We've got a jam-packed show today with expert policy analysis from Salim Al-Hook. We've got the First Lady of Mexico, a couple of comments from her. Interesting piece with the Director of Energy and Climate Change at Philips, so business perspective as well, and also some really interesting press conferences both from Friends of the Earth and the South Centre giving their perspective on the talks. So it's going to be a busy couple of hours, but we've got a nice piece to kick off with. Delighted to say that Charlie Young has joined us, and you're with UN Fair Play. So perhaps we should get started by telling our viewers what UN Fair Play is.
We're a project of about 7 people now, and we're here as we're all student volunteers and trying to level out the playing field in terms of negotiating process. And so at the moment there are massive inequalities in terms of the most vulnerable countries are actually least able to participate in the process. And so what we're trying to do is, through various different activities, try and make it possible for those who are the most vulnerable to be able to have their voice heard.
And how do you go about doing that? What does that mean on a practical day-to-day basis?
Yeah, within the rhetoric. Well, we're doing 3 things at the moment, which is the first is practical support. So we're working with several delegations to actually just do the jobs that they would like to do if they had a larger team. The second thing we're doing is all the notes that we take from public meetings, from UNFCCC meetings, we're putting online. So any delegations can use them, and they're being used, they're quite popular at the moment. And then the third thing we're doing is we just released a report that was the result of years worth of work at all the intersessionals, and that's been picked up by 350. We've had comments from the Secretariat. Ivo de Boer just emailed us. So we're really pushing that and trying to work with organisations to open up the debate about something we think is a really important issue that's hardly ever spoken about.
Okay, so you say that you're working with delegations, and I noticed that you have Kiribati on your party badge. What kind of...
It's pronounced Kiribati.
Kiribati, yeah. Sorry, thank you.
Fine, no. I think one person out of 20 has got it right.
I should know that because I did actually interview somebody from Kiribati yesterday. But what's the kind of day-to-day activities that you've been doing with them? What kind of support have you been providing them?
Yeah, well, we were with them in Copenhagen as well. And so then and here we've been summarising reports that they haven't had time to read. Their delegation here is 17 people, but it's actually, that seems like quite a lot of people, but really the negotiators that they have on the ground is much less than that, because there are NGOs accredited, there's us as well. And so we've been covering meetings that they don't have the capacity to cover, taking notes, telling them what's been going on, and just any odd jobs that they want, really.
And so UN Fair Play is a group of volunteers. When did you get started?
Just before, in the run-up to Copenhagen. So it was a group of people who, I think there are 2 of us here now who were there, and so it's just we're a very amorphous project. It just relies on people's altruism to say, hey, I'll join in. Okay. So this year it's a completely new group of people, pretty much. But last year what happened is that we saw that there were lots of people, volunteers at the conference, who, when they got there, kind of ended up not really doing very much, picking up flyers, taking photos with famous people, and we thought this was a specific problem that we could deal with, and that lots of people can deal with and help us with. And so we started just before Copenhagen, and we got lots of really good responses. So we're now helping quite a few delegations.
And what's your experience been in Cancun so far, like following these talks? What do you make of the way that they're going, and kind of the delegation in Kiribati? Like what's the feeling in the Moon Palace Hotel?
The Moon Palace Hotel. It's not great, but it's a stepping stone to something that could be a lot better than the Copenhagen Accord. I think what we're focusing on is the fact that the negotiations are just so divided from reality, and really, whatever comes out of this in the future is really much too late. Kiribati is already facing the effects of climate change, and unless 1.5 degrees and 350 are in the text, which it is looking unlikely to be, but it's still possible, then really there's no future for that island. And so what we're trying to do is bring back the conference to reality. And so the fact that the most vulnerable nations are being listened to the least here is just something that's completely ridiculous. And so it's very detached. It being in the Moon Palace for a start, it being in Cancun, this mess of construction and concrete and steel where there was once a mangrove forest. And so really the conference is a bit, it's not the best, but the UNFCCC process is the best that we have, and we're trying to work with that.
And you mentioned that UN Fair Play's just brought out a report. What were you kind of looking at, and what were the findings?
Well, we were looking at negotiating capacity, so seeing how well different delegations from different parts of the world could contribute to the process. And what we found was that there were lots of delegations who simply don't have enough people to cover the meetings that are going on within the UNFCCC. I mean, one thing is that there are often 6 meetings going on at the same time. That's the maximum number of desired meetings. So there are often more going on at the same time. But 15% of delegations here have less than 5 people. So have 5 people or less, sorry. So you physically can't cover the meetings, let alone informals and side events. Something else we found is that there's a real disproportionate representation. For every 100 million African inhabitants, people living in Africa, there are 3 delegates here, and for every 100 million in Europe, there are 6.5. So, I mean, there are more people from Europe, despite the fact that Africa is much more vulnerable. The other thing is that Brazil, as a single delegation, has more representatives than the 39 countries of AOSIS. And so the other thing is that small delegations can't really keep up with what's going on, because even if they've missed the meetings, there's no way to see what's happened unless you watch webcasts, which are videos of the whole thing. But those don't work in countries with low bandwidth, and there are no transcripts at all of the meetings that have happened. So there's no way of quoting what's said on the floor. Journalists, have to paraphrase, and NGOs have to just rely on what they've been told. So
it's amazing that there's no transcripts.
Absolutely incredible, and we've been researching that as much as possible, and really it's not been advertised or publicised. So we're hoping to meet with the Secretariat to talk about before, in the interim, before more funded spots, become available. We want to try and work to see if the process could be changed and adapted so that countries with low negotiating capacity can be helped.
And we were in Tianjin in China, the previous negotiations that took place a month or so ago, and chatting to some of the delegates from the small island states there, they were saying that a huge problem for them is that they have a small diplomatic corps at home, and that actually the people that get sent to these conferences changes year on year, and so there's no kind of institutional memory as well. So. Is there a hope that the UN Fair Play might be able to provide some kind of expertise in via the documents it's keeping and the like? What would you like to do in the long term?
I mean, what we're trying, we are just a group of unpaid volunteers, and we're having more people coming in all the time, and what we're trying to provide is some element of continuity. But what we're also realizing is that as a civil society group, there's only so much that we can do. And so that's why we're trying to work with the Secretariat. That's why we produced the report. But the other thing is that you're completely right. I mean, in the delegations that we've spoken to over the last year at all the intersessionals, through interviews and questionnaires, there are some delegations of 20 plus of whom only one person has ever been to a COP before. Mm-hmm. And I mean that's an issue just to do with negotiating capacity and needing to have more delegates available coming from different countries. For example, the Namibian delegation had 40 people signed on to come, and they were cut in half the moment before the conference. So 20 people actually turned up because of funding issues, and a lot of the people who are most experienced had to be taken off. So it's a real serious issue that's hindering the process. So.
And I'm sure as many of our viewers will kind of empathise with, if you haven't been to one of these conferences before, trying to take in the logistics and the acronyms that kind of come flowing out of here, and it's our job to try and translate these horrendous bits of jargon into something that's accessible. But it's almost, I can't imagine how people would be able to cope with it.
There are another delegation we spoke to, from the Honduran delegation. The finance team has 4 people, and only one of them speaks English, and so that as well is a really big problem. And just trying to sort through the acronyms and through the jargon and through the legal language, and just it's absolutely crazy. And I mean, we've said there are several other just key recommendations that are really easy to implement, like putting the text that's being discussed up on the screens as they're actually being edited, because sometimes that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. Often translations don't happen quickly enough, so like francophone nations and Spanish-speaking nations just can't keep up. They just don't know what's being discussed. So really, I think we have this assumption that out from the outside that every country comes and they speak for their country and everyone's listened to, and actually it's a real really difficult situation, and it's a real mess in lots of ways. And the other thing is just that inside the negotiations, it seems as though there's this tacit agreement that even the developing country delegations that we speak to say, oh yeah, but it's inevitable, it's always going to happen. And we really don't think that's the case, and we really think that there are lots of things that can be done to make it more even. So
and so what in 5 years' time, what would you, if you had if there's a vision for UN fair play, what could we be hoping? Would it be kind of huge teams of volunteers from around the world supporting it, or would you be an organisation kind of like a independent diplomatic corps that's going to be supporting institutions and organisations here?
I think there are several things that can be done. We're aiming to try and get transcripts for COP17. That would be one thing that could really help underrepresented delegations. The other thing is getting some sort of legitimacy, because we're young people and going out to delegations saying, hey, we're going to help you. It's quite, can be seen as quite patronising. So legitimacy from the UNFCCC Secretariat would be good. But really, if we're actually going to make some real impact, there needs to be a change in the structure and the process of negotiations. So that's what we're aiming at, to try and widen out a dialogue, to create some funding projects underneath the UNFCCC so that individual countries can pay for more delegates to come. And so that would be a larger campaign, and we're teaming up with various organisations at the moment. So that's really what we're looking to do. Yeah.
Oh, Charlie, it's been great to get an insight as to some of the challenges that the smaller states here face, and the steps you've taken to try and help them out. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to go to a video now which my colleague Zaina put together earlier in the week. It's from the protests outside the conference, so we'll just leave you with that.